Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan joining us now live. Minister, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it. What's your response? Have you failed South Africans?
Good evening to you and your viewers, Shahan. No, I don't think so. With great respect to Mr. Godi. Mr. Godi is, of course, now a retired politician and has no responsibility for anything, whereas we do have a responsibility, and our responsibility is to fix these institutions that, as Chief Justice Zondo says in his many reports over thousands of pages, have been seriously impacted by state capture. And interestingly, that state capture took place at a time when Mr. Godi himself was chair of Scopa. And it's fascinating to now ask the question, what was Scopa doing at a time when auditors didn't detect procurement fraud and corruption, when auditors went to the same CEOs who today the Zondo Commission identifies as collaborators in a massive scheme, as Justice Zondo says, to ensure that SOEs are the targets for extraction of vast resources. But let's get back to the key issue. The key issue is, do we have an electricity problem in South Africa? We do. And I think from the President to ourselves in Cabinet to the board and management of Eskom, it's very clear that the 16 or 17 power stations that we have, the 3 sort of pump stations, as they call, that we have, and the 1 nuclear station that we have, and the energy that we get from Cahora Bassa, which is just over 11 or 1200 megawatts each day, if the lines are working, that collective of megawatts availability is inadequate for the demand that we have right now. Secondly, it's also well understood amongst engineers who understand power stations, who understand boilers, who understand turbines, who understand mills, that lots of wrong things were done, operationally speaking, during a particular period in Eskom's history. That is what is now being fixed. And that takes time, it takes a lot of effort. But at the same time, I have every sympathy with South Africans who would say that we need to do all of this faster. Now, I'm not an engineer. I don't go and operate the power stations. All I can do, and do certainly on behalf of government and the people of South Africa, is to urge the Eskom management and the Eskom staff, please do your best to make sure that we sustain energy supply in South Africa. Secondly, make sure you have the right skills. And clearly, I think Mr. De Ruyter and others have pointed out, there is a problem with skills, because part of state capture was to, in fact, ensure that important institutions like Eskom were institutions in which people with the right skills and who were honest were kicked out. So today, Eskom engineers are sitting in the Middle East, they're sitting in Philippines, and they're sitting in many other parts of the world, whereas they could have been part of the Eskom recovery. And we could have been doing it much faster than we are currently doing it. So, yes, there's a shortage of skills as well. There are certainly problems in the wider industry on the coal supply side as well. So Mr. De Ruyter is not wrong when he says that there is a, let's call it, value chain of corruption that's operating in certain instances, from coal that is expected to be supplied to coal that is actually supplied, and people within Eskom who accept that kind of coal as well. Some of them have been caught out. Many more of them need to be caught out and need to be held accountable at the end of the day as well.
Yeah.
Clearly, what we require, as Eskom has been saying for some time, is 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts of surplus capacity, which would enable proper maintenance to actually happen. But even on the maintenance front, I think we must be frank. And that is that the quality of maintenance, either done by Eskom staff in one of their subsidiaries or done by outside contractors, sometimes is of poor quality. And no sooner maintenance is done, that particular unit collapses again.
Yeah.
And these are problems that the board and the management of Eskom must give urgent attention to make sure that we move to a higher level of certainty about energy supply in South Africa. Finally, Mr. Godi also makes some claims about Eskom being privatized, and that is why deliberately things are being run down and there's movement between away from coal to renewables. Well, I'm not sure whether we're living on the same planet, because it's known amongst all knowledgeable people in the planet, who must be billions of people, and as we've just experienced in KwaZulu-Natal and Eastern Cape and other parts of the country, that climate change is a serious phenomenon, and that we cannot ignore the impacts of climate change. We cannot ignore the impact of carbon emissions. And in the Mpumalanga context, we can't also ignore the emission of particles of the wrong types, of sulfur and so on, in that context as well. So all of these things mean that we've got to, over a period of the next 20 or 30 years, move away from coal. We're not switching off tomorrow, all of the power stations. There are certain power stations like Komati, like Krootvlei, that are very old. They're well beyond 50 years or so, and they are going to be decommissioned in time. At the same time, as we've indicated as government, the megawatts that we lose from the coal power stations have to be replaced in terms of the integrated resource plan of 2019 by one or other kind of other types of sources of energy, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's gas, whether it is nuclear, and all of that, my colleague Minister Mantashe's department is actually responsible for. And I think I must be also frank that some of the regulatory processes in South Africa should move much faster than they are moving.
Yeah.
So that the 100 megawatt ceiling that has now been set, which used to be 1 megawatt for renewable plants, which can now attract somewhere between 30 and 50 billion rands worth of projects and many thousands of megawatts of energy, can be implemented much faster than they're being implemented at the moment. So those are matters that Operation Vulindlela on the one hand in the presidency and treasury, and others must actually deal with to actually get right. So the bottom line is, Shahan and our fellow listeners, that there is an energy crisis. What we require urgently is energy security in South Africa. We are not going to get it overnight, but at the same time, if Eskom plants are run better, if there's less nefarious activities going on among some people within Eskom itself and perhaps some outsiders as well, then we can actually ensure that there's a greater deal of stability than we have currently. And nobody is missing in action. Every single day there are interactions taking place, whether it is with one SOE or another, to ensure that we optimize operations, that we provide the right kind of service through these SOEs so that our economy can grow, so that jobs can be created, and that investment, both from South Africans and others, can be brought into South Africa.
Okay, Minister, let me raise some of the issues that we heard from Eskom this week, which many South Africans were worried about. The fact that we don't have a fully functioning power station in this country. Also the fact that under the new leadership, we're seeing more load shedding days in this period this year than we saw previously. And they themselves raised that as a concern. So are we actually having an effective leadership team in Eskom right now if we're seeing more load shedding in South Africa?
Yeah, often many of these things are not about leadership, Shahan. They're about operations. It's like you blaming the CEO of ENCA for something that goes wrong because a cameraman or a technician hasn't done the right thing on your TV station. So who do you want to blame, the CEO or the operational person who must actually make sure that there's the right kind of professionalism, there's the right kind of diligence, and there's the right kind of accountability? So you can change your CEO as many times as you like, but if the people at a technical level don't do what they're supposed to do, and many of the power station managers are extremely diligent in what they do, but they handle staff of between 700 and 1,000 people within a power station. And it's very easy, as we've learned on several occasions in the last few years, that if you want to disrupt the work of a power station, which is so large and so complex, it's fairly easy to leave a tap either unopened or not closed, or to open a vent when it shouldn't actually be opened. And these are things that we have noticed, or the Eskom management has noticed over time. So what we do require, and I certainly agree with that, is higher levels of operational efficiency, higher levels of diligence to make sure we are all doing the right things at an operational level. And that's the task of the Eskom management, to instill that kind of professionalism and diligence and accountability within that context as well.
Okay, I get your analogy, right? But we're talking about a private company versus a state-owned entity that basically keeps this country's lights on. Even if we use that analogy, you expect a CEO to oversee things to a point where we see improvements in a company, or in this case, in Eskom. Have we seen an improvement, given the fact that Eskom admits we've seen more days of load shedding in this period compared to the previous?
No, I mean, the facts are the facts. Nobody can run away from the fact that you've seen more days now than before. But I'm also sure that you've heard from the same CEO and COO and other members of staff of the senior management of Eskom that there are one or other kind of operational problems that they are actually confronted with. So I make no excuse for them. As I said, they get paid for ensuring that those sorts of operational problems are minimized, and that even within the limited number of megawatts that are available, there's a greater level of predictability and assurance that the South African public can be given. And those are the conversations we have day in and day out with the Eskom management, and with a board that needs to be replenished and refreshed as well, which will happen shortly, so that we are able to answer the kind of questions that you are asking.
Yeah. And, you know, lastly, Minister, for South Africans who are currently being load shed, obviously not able to watch this, but I'm sure they'll pick it up online at a later stage. Assurances that we're moving in the right direction. It's hard to actually believe government or Eskom when we keep hearing about the difficulties, the challenges. I, for one, fully understand where we're coming from, especially with the state capture report, the latest edition, showing the rot within Eskom and how it was handed over to certain individuals, right? I get that. But you have angry South Africans who are saying, but why is there more load shedding? Didn't we put in a new leadership team to actually fix this issue? But we're seeing more of this. What do you say to them tonight, apart from, sorry, we're working on it?
Well, we've got to say that we have a real problem in South Africa, firstly. Secondly, that there is a shortage of electricity. Thirdly, that there is a plan to make sure that we get more megawatts. So, for example, we need about 40,000 megawatts that are fully operational at this point in time. And over the next 10 years, many more megawatts as well. And the integrated resource plan is designed in a way in which it should deliver that number of megawatts, recognizing the kind of problems that we have within Eskom as an institution. But as you know, there are many private sector participants who are now coming to the party on the generation side with massive renewable projects that will also create the necessity for greater investment in the transmission wires that Eskom operates as well. So what I say is I fully understand the exasperation. We all do. Secondly, we will redouble our efforts to make sure that the factors which result in these regular breakdowns are minimized to the extent that it is possible. And thirdly, I think all of us, particularly those who live in and around power stations, must be a lot more aware of any crooked activity that is going on. And let's work together as a country to identify, and I'm not going to name any particular constituency, but identify people who are creating and contributing to the problems that we are confronted with at the moment. And we've said that until we get these extra megawatts into the system, and in my view, as I've said already, that process has been far too slow to actually help the current environment in which we find ourselves. We will have to together live through a bit of pain and uncertainty. But I think we hear the South African public loud and clear that we would like to see load shedding minimized in a very serious way in the shortest possible time. And that's a conversation that we will continue to have, and perhaps more than just a conversation, with the Eskom board and management as well.
Okay, I have two more questions, and this is something that came up yesterday. We saw Democracy in Action going to the union buildings yesterday, saying that you, Minister, and the entire Eskom leadership must go. How would you respond to that? You told me that you can't keep changing CEOs, but what about your position?
What about the position? I'm here. I'm doing my work every single day, sometimes 18 hours a day. I don't have to advertise the work that we do. I don't have to appear on your screens every day to assure you that we are at work. And ultimately, it's the president's prerogative to say to me, well, it's time for you to retire. But that we will consider in due course. Right now, we have a piece of work, and I believe that the department and myself have been fully accountable in this particular regard, and there's no magic wand that's available to anybody in South Africa. You can replace me, you can replace the CEO, you can replace the board, you can replace power station managers in certain instances, but that's not going to give us immediate answers. It's at the operational level that we need to get things right in the first instance, and in the second instance, it's the supply of additional megawatts that will make South Africa move forward in this particular regard. And that will come.
Carry on.
I say that that additional megawatts will come, and it's going to take a little bit of time, but it will come. And there are many megawatts of renewable investments that are taking place at the moment, and perhaps in other sources of energy as well, which will materialize sometime next year.
Yeah, I know Andre de Ruyter said this week it needs to happen sooner so that they can get assistance to conduct the maintenance work that needs to happen.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, so let's talk about this call for a national state of disaster to actually help deal with load shedding. What are your thoughts on that?
No, we've had that debate last week with Mr. Malaham and his party and all the other parties in Parliament as well. So I hope you've also researched that. I think this is not the time for theatrics and melodrama. What does a state of disaster do that we can't do at the moment? And I think what the DA and Mr. Malaham are interested in, as was very evident in his speech last week, is that this is an opportunity to undertake political attacks rather than come up with concrete solutions. And when you ask the question, what is the solution that you have, there's only one word that they utilize, and that is privatize. Now, the private sector is involved every day in Eskom's life. The private sector supplies coal. The private sector supplies the trucks that carry the coal in many of the instances. The private sector supplies parts that Eskom actually requires to do the repairs that it needs to undertake. The private sector supplies the contractors that do the maintenance work, and I can go on. So the private sector is very much part of what works at Eskom and what doesn't work at Eskom as well. So this is not an ideological issue, which regrettably some parliamentarians want to make it. Right now, as you correctly pointed out, we need to focus on getting this institution and its power stations to work. And that's the single most important focus. It's not time to play politics with the energy question. If you have a serious suggestion about how a power station can be fixed, about what is a miraculous way of getting 2,000 or 3,000 megawatts of energy online tomorrow morning, please, our doors are open, our ears are open, put forward the proposition, and if it's a viable one, we'll certainly pick it up. Because that's where the intellectual energy and the positive contribution of anybody, whether you're in Parliament or outside of Parliament, can actually make a difference to all of us.
Okay, Minister, thanks so much for your time. And I know you can't come on the show every week, but hopefully we can speak to you more often to ultimately reassure South Africans about the work being done at Eskom. I think they want to hear from the Minister.
You are most welcome.
Yeah.
And I'm available.
Okay, thank you so much, Minister. Appreciate it. Pravin Gordhan, the Public Enterprises Minister there, speaking to us.